These are different strains. We have some Russian bees.
Yeah, there's some that are real black. Like
They're more aggressive, but better honey producers.
They're supposedly more hygienic. They supposedly pick the mites off better. And then the Italians are like the traditional.
They're very, very docile, but not as good honey producers and not as clean.
Not as hygienic.
Not as hygienic.
As far as being like stronger overall, they're definitely stronger. So they probably are doing something right.
Yeah, so the bees are all shut up for the winter. The first thing we do is put that hardware cloth on there, and that's kind of a mouse guard, because when it starts to get cold, mice once in a while will crawl up in
like
there.
If they're not active. An active hive will keep mice out, but then, if they're not active.
Sometimes the bees will be clustered up higher, and a mouse will go in low and start eating honeycomb.
And then they destroy, and they just,
chew on the frames.
Just urinate everywhere. And
bring in nest material and stuff. So we put those on first when around October 1, the mouse guards.
Yeah, when it starts to get cool.
And then the other wooden guards are entrance reducers. So you reduce the cold air coming in, but the bees can still come and go. They have two different settings. There's like a big entrance, and then if you flip it 1/4 turn, there'd be a little entrance. Like this one just has a little entrance open. So, they're active inside all year, so inside the hive. So, if it gets 50 degrees, 55 degrees, bright and sunny, a few of them will come out flying. And if it gets 60 degrees, which it does sometimes a day in December, they'll all be out flying. All winter they do these, they call them cleansing flights. They kind of clean up the hive. They take out defecation and things like that, and they keep the hive clean. So the bees over the winter will work their way up. Theoretically, if the hive is strong and there's brood and pollen and honey everywhere, they'll start down the bottom, and as the winter goes on, they'll elevate and they'll work their way up. So that bottom super or brood chamber will pretty much be empty by spring. By March, that bottom box is usually empty, and the bees are up higher. So we had some issues with bears.
Well, we had kind of a lesser charger, and I guess we were always plugged in, but we had kind of we had a charger that was maybe 10 years old, and so I don't know what we were putting out, but that's like the real key is just keeping the bears out, because you do all this work, and then the bears, one fell swoop will.
And weeds are a problem, so we had some extra leftover shingles from our house, and so that kind of made a nice weed barrier.
Back when we first got started, it was easy to, you didn't have to worry about mites or bears, and we were pretty hands-off, and it worked, but, anymore now, you do have to be a little more active, with management, because
pretty much been treating every colony for mites.
So we treat with, it's called Apolite Var, and it's kind of a soft chemical. It's supposedly, one of the softer chemicals. It doesn't leave residue in the wax. And for years and years we used the hard chemicals, and I guess they work, but then after a while they don't work, and then they tend to kill the bees too, supposedly. So I'm going to say it was like maybe in the early 90s is when mites started to be bad. Maybe late 80s, early 90s.
Yeah, so when we first had bees, there was no problem with mites. There was no problem with bears. There was really no problems. If they were weak, you fed them, and that was about it.
3 of them kind of weak.
Small, weak swarms, a little later in the year. So one of the first things you do in the first warm day in March, or sometimes 1st of April, is flip those boxes. Just switch those bottom 2 brood chambers. So then hopefully, that second brood chamber is full of bees. You put it on the bottom, you put the empty one on top, and then they work their way up, filling it with eggs, brood, pollen, and honey. And, you've given them more room just by flipping those boxes. The tendency to swarm is when they don't have enough room.
So the key is to make sure they have enough food in the fall, and pretty much all of them were good except for that one and this 5th one here. So I ended up doing, I think I fed about 40 or 60 pounds of granulated sugar mixed with water in September, October, which is kind of late. You want to be done feeding by probably Columbus Day here, just because then they still have to evaporate it and do all that. So I think it was probably maybe a week or 2 past Columbus. When they need room, they need room. There's not
It's almost like you have to look at them every day. You can kind of look at them and they got plenty of room, and in 2 or 3 days they just, if there's a good honey flow, they just fill it right up. And then there's this urge to swarm.
So we haven't really figured out how to stop swarming. I mean, we had 9 or 10 swarms. We caught, I'm going to say, 6 or 7, and then we ended up combining.
I think the more swarms we're getting is these Russians and Carniola bees. They're big populations real quick, and that. I think once they want to swarm, you can destroy all the queen cells you want. They just keep doing it, and they'll swarm.
So that's kind of the way we figure. Like, well, that's what they want to do. We'll just catch them.
You see the newspaper between the boxes.
Yeah.
These were weak swarms that we combined 2 hives. And that's kind of the simple way that you combine 2 hives. You just take a piece of newspaper and put it between the 2 boxes and combine the 2 hives. And they chew through the newspaper over a few days. So it takes them a few days, and they kind of get the smell of each other.
The weak queen supposedly is on top, and then she gets killed by the other queen. So, and this one actually is 3 swarms put together, and I don't know if they're going to make it or not.
A swarm will leave here, and it seems like for some reason they try to head to our vegetable garden.
Okay.
So most all of them have landed on that peach tree.
In that first peach tree is the swarm catching tree. So they land there, and you leave them settle for a while. And
not too long, because then they'll leave.
So you take a empty box, one of these deep supers, and you put 3 or 4 or 5 frames, depending on how big the swarm is, and then a bottom board. And you kind of plug up the holes so they don't leave with grass, so air flows and they'll slowly chew their way out. And then you just hold the box. You could kind of put a ladder or a wheelbarrow under the swarm, and depending how they're situated, you can just take pruners and prune the branch and take them over the hive and shake. Give 1 good shake or 2 good shakes, or you could use a bee brush and just try and get them all in. And if you get the queen, they'll go in. So queen's usually in the middle of that swarm, so you shake it real hard, make sure you shake all the bees in, and sometimes we put a sheet underneath of it, because if it's a real big swarm and you're shaking it, you might get like 80% of the bees in, but 20% will fall to the sides. And if the queen is in there, it's amazing. You'll see like the little army of bees, march into the hive.
We get them in here right away, because if you don't move them right away, and they kind of get set up there, then they're always going to return to that spot. So you can only move them either more than 2 miles or less than 2 feet. That's kind of like the rule.
If you have a swarm in there and you move it out here 20, 30 feet away, the next day all the bees will go back, where they first left the hive.
So if we don't do it right away, we'll put them on a wheelbarrow and we'll move them a little bit every day.
We probably harvested honey from about 5 hives?
Yeah.
6? About 5 hives, and got probably close to 300 pounds of honey. So we're getting 50, 60 pounds per colony, which is not fantastic. If you have a fantastic year, you can get double that, 100, 120 pounds per colony. But we're pretty conservative about always leaving them plenty of honey for the winter. We don't rob them excessively.
So when we take our honey in July, and it seems like, well, boy, we're leaving them a lot, and then it kind of they eat a lot of it. Especially this year was dry, and the nectar sources weren't that great. So
they eat a lot of honey.
They ate.
So we seed a mix of clovers. We seed white clover, crimson clover, and the crop that we found we think is getting us more honey is yellow blossom sweet clover. It's a biennial, so if we seeded it this August, it won't flower until the summer of 16. This first year, 2015, a rosette of leaves will come up, and it photosynthesizes, builds a big taproot, and then the following summer it sends up a big shoot about 5 or 6 feet high, and it'll be a sea of yellow flowers, and it'll be a sea of bees. They're just in there.
We planted buckwheat, and they like that okay, but I think it's a really short-lived flower. Like it's
for pollen,
for
nectar.
I don't think it's a great source of nectar. It's funny though, like in our garden, we have asparagus. They're cut down now, and they love the flowers of that, and I guess they're getting pollen out of that.
And we have another field of Christmas trees beyond the hedgerow there, and that field, when we seeded grasses to plant the Christmas trees in, a lot of that field we seeded a mix of grass and white clover. So we have quite a bit of white clover on the farm. It's pretty long-lived perennial, but beyond these tall native grasses, we also grow pumpkins, and we rotate pumpkins. You can't really grow pumpkins 2 years in the same soil, so we have 3 like half-acre patches there. So our rotation is pumpkins, and then we seed a winter cover crop of rye, and then next year we'll seed clover. So every year there's about an acre of clover there, right, within a few hundred feet here. And then there'll be a patch of pumpkins. And the pumpkins are pollinated by bees, so, we have good crop of pumpkins every year, too. I think we had great pumpkins this year. It was a great honey year. The bees did good. So I think it all works together.